The wind came knifing through the breaks east of the ranch, dragging with it a hush that blanketed the high plains in white. Snow didn't fall like in the cities, soft and decorative. Here it smothered, it silenced. And in the morning after, it revealed what hadn't belonged. Rhett Coulter stepped out of the stable just as the sun cracked low over the ridge. A fine layer of frost clung to his beard, the collar of his shearling coat stiff with ice. He'd been up before dawn, like always. Horses didn't feed themselves, and the cold made beasts as ornery as men. He didn't see her at first, not until one of the mares snorted, ears flicking toward the snowpack by the corral fence. Something dark against the white. Rhett strode out, boots crunching over the frozen crust. The figure didn't move. A woman he saw as he drew closer. Small, soaked to the bone, hair like wet ash tangled across her face. Her coat was too thin, her fingers curled as if grasping something that had long slipped away. He knelt beside her, pressing two fingers to her throat, a pulse, barely. Skin like porcelain pulled too tight. He didn't ask questions, not then. He scooped her up, light as a starved colt, and carried her into the house. Inside, he cleared the big oak table and laid her down. She wasn't dead, but she would be soon if he didn't warm her fast. He built the fire higher and boiled water, then stripped off her outer layers, cursing under his breath at the wet cotton clinging to skin. Bruises marked her wrists. A fresh cut on her cheekbone. Someone had struck her hard. She didn't wake while he worked, just shivered beneath the quilts he piled over her. Her lips moved soundlessly, maybe a prayer, maybe nothing. Rhett sat back after a time, staring at her. There, been no tracks but hers leading in. No wagon, no horse. How long had she walked? Where had she come from? He'd come to this land 10 years back to be alone. The Coulter ranch stretched across miles of wind-bitten hills and high brush country, enough to lose any past in. He never married, never even entertained the idea. Women complicated things, turned bone simple into sideways mess. But now there was a woman in his house, barely alive, and the way she clenched the blanket with a child's desperation told him she wasn't running toward anything. She was running from something. When she finally stirred, her eyes opened slow and wild, like she'd surfaced from a nightmare that wasn't done with her yet. She tried to sit but winced, hand to her ribs. "You're safe," Rhett said, quiet. "You were half dead in the snow. You need to stay put." Her eyes flicked to him, pale green, sharp despite the fear. She didn't speak. "You want water?" he asked. She nodded once. He brought a cup, held it for her while she drank. Her hands trembled too badly to do it herself. When she finished, she looked down at the floorboards, lips parting. "I didn't mean to come here." "You didn't," he said. "You collapsed by my stable. That ain't a visit." She swallowed. "You gonna turn me in?" "To who?" She didn't answer. Her eyes went distant, and Rhett saw it then. Whoever she was, whatever had happened, the world had stopped offering her mercy a long time ago. "I don't need trouble," he said. "But I won't send a half-frozen woman back into the hills." "Name's Miriam," she said after a long moment. He didn't offer his. She noticed, but said nothing. Later, after she drifted to sleep again, Rhett stood at the window watching snow fall in fitful gusts. The ranch house was quiet but for the ticking of the stove and the slow breath of the stranger in his bed. Trouble had come in on frost-bitten feet and curled itself into his life like a story half told. He hadn't wanted a wife. He still didn't, but winter had ways of deciding things men never would. The second day came with a brittle sun and the hush of snowfall easing, though drifts still crouched high against the fence rails. Rhett saddled his gelding and rode the ridge just past the draw, checking for tracks, signs of anyone who might have followed. But the storm had swept the land clean. No trail in, no trail out. When he returned, the house was still. He found her in the kitchen, standing barefoot by the stove, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts. She'd raided his shelf and boiled coffee, though her hands shook as she poured. "You shouldn't be on your feet," he said. "I couldn't lie there another minute, felt like a corpse waiting to dry." Her voice had gravel in it, like someone used to keeping things inside. She sipped, winced. Her lip was split. Rhett crossed the room and opened a tin of biscuits. She took one with quiet thanks, eating like someone who didn't trust it would last. He leaned against the sink, arms folded. "You want to tell me who you're running from?" "No." Silence stretched out. Just the stove ticking and the wind humming against the eaves. "You got a man?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "Had a father. He gave me to a man." "You escape him." "Shot him," she said without flinching. "Didn't stay to see if he died." Rhett didn't ask for the details. He saw what it had cost her, the tremor in her spine, the way she wouldn't look him in the eye long. "You killed him for cause." "I'd do it again." He nodded once. That was enough. By nightfall, she'd eaten real food and found her legs steady. She explored the house, slow and quiet, touched the worn wood of the bookcase, the brass knob on the clock, as if memorizing her surroundings in case she had to flee again. Rhett watched her without meaning to. She was younger than he'd first guessed. Early 20s maybe, though the lines at her mouth said life had never come easy. No softness to her, no coquetry. Just a straight-backed resolve that belonged more to the grave than the parlor. Later that week, when the snow eased and the wind settled, Rhett hitched up the wagon and rode into town for supplies. He left her with a rifle and said nothing about trust. When he returned, the woodpile was split, the dishes were clean, and the corral fence he'd meant to fix had a new board in place. "I don't owe you," she said that night, scrubbing potatoes at the sink. "I didn't say you did. But I'll pull my weight." "All right." A month passed that way. Winter held fast, but not so tight. Rhett taught her to muck stalls and set snares. She learned fast, moved like someone who'd survived worse things than cold. Some nights she'd sit by the fire with his dog curled at her feet, eyes far away, body still. One morning she came in from the barn with her hands bleeding from a busted gate latch. "You could have waited," he said, pulling out the iodine. "I don't wait," she said, jaw clenched. He cleaned the cuts in silence. She didn't flinch. That night after supper, she sat across from him at the table. "I need to leave in the spring." "You think he's still alive?" "Doesn't matter. I won't stay put long, not safe." Rhett lit his pipe and looked at her through the smoke. "You could make it safe. If you stayed." She stared at him, something uncertain flickering behind her calm. "You offering me something?" "I'm offering you shelter. What you make of it's your own choice." She looked away. "I don't know what that means." "It means I won't ask what you've done, and I won't turn you out, not unless you want it." The dog barked once low. Outside, the wind stirred the snow again. Inside, something shifted between them, still small, but there. Rhett Coulter never wanted a wife, still didn't, but when she stood to clear the table and her hand brushed his, he didn't move away, not right away. Spring came slow to the high country. The snow didn't melt so much as retreat, inch by grudging inch, leaving behind fields of brown and brittle earth. Rhett watched the land wake with caution. It was never a gentle season. Calves were lost to cold snaps, fences buckled under runoff, and the wind, always the wind, came harder now, like it knew time was changing something it couldn't stop. Miriam changed too. She no longer flinched at every slam of the door. No longer kept her boots by the hearth, ready to run. She spoke more, though not of the past, only of practical things, tools, the garden, how the mare favored her right leg when saddled. She rode now and rode well. Rhett gave her a bay gelding with a wary streak, and she broke his temper with patience, not force. They spent hours in the saddle, checking fence lines, herding cattle from the low ground to higher pastures. When she rode, she looked older. Not in years, but in bearing, like she belonged to the earth in some older way. One afternoon, while mending a down stretch of fence, Miriam straightened and asked, "You ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" "Didn't trust myself to choose right." She looked at him, squinting against the sun. "What about now?" He didn't answer, just drove the next nail in. That night she brought in a bucket of eggs and a split lip. One of the hens had turned mean. Rhett poured whiskey into a rag and pressed it to the wound. She winced and grinned at once. "You got a kind way of showing care," she said. He shrugged. "Better than letting it fester." The moment hung there, close and strange. Her face inches from his, eyes dark in the lamp glow. She didn't pull away. "I don't know how to be someone's woman," she said, "not the way people mean it." "I ain't people." They didn't speak of it again, but something shifted. By mid-April, the land had turned green in patches. Flowers bloomed wild in the lower meadows. Rhett caught her standing barefoot in the creek, skirts hiked, humming something soft and tuneless. When she saw him, she didn't stop, just lifted a brow like she dared him to make it a moment, but peace doesn't settle easy on the hunted. And it wasn't long before it came undone. He was in town, trading feed and salt, when he saw a flyer tacked to the sheriff's board. WANTED, Miriam CROWLEY. Petite woman, dark hair, green eyes. Suspect in the disappearance of Samuel Rourke. Considered armed and dangerous. Reward offered. Rhett stared at it long. The drawing was rough, but it caught enough. She said she shot him, not that he'd gone missing. The sheriff eyed him from inside the office. You seen anything like her, Coulter? Rhett shook his head. Looks like every half-starved girl west of the river. But inside, something settled hard. On the ride back, he didn't rush, didn't let the anger stir up. She hadn't lied, not exactly. Just hadn't told it all. When he reached the house, he found her splitting kindling behind the shed. She glanced up, read his face in an instant. You saw the flyer. He nodded. I was 15 when he took me, she said before he could speak. My father owed him, said I was payment. Rhett's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. I stayed 3 years. First year I tried to run. He broke my arm. Second year I stopped speaking. Third year I found a gun. Is he dead? I think so. He wasn't breathing when I left, but they never found the body. He looked at her long, the blade still in her hand, her eyes steady. I ain't sorry, she said. I wouldn't ask you to be. He turned and walked toward the barn, but she followed. If they come looking. They won't find you, he said without turning. How can you be sure? Because I've buried things deeper than truth out here. She said nothing. Just stood in the grass, wind tugging her shirt loose. Later, over the fire, she asked, would you have turned me in? Not then, not now. Her voice dropped, even if I told you he wasn't the only one. He looked up. I've done what I had to, she said, and I'll keep doing it. He reached for her wrist, not rough, just steady. Then you'll do it from here on my land, under my roof. It wasn't a proposal, not yet, it was something older. A pact made in silence, forged by snow and scars and long nights between. And Miriam, who'd never belonged to anything but the wind, nodded once. I'll stay, till I'm done running. By summer, the land had grown thick and hard-edged under the sun. Dust clung to everything, boots, lungs, thoughts. Heat brought flies and the whisper of old ghosts. The herd stretched across the far range now, grazing on high grass while Rhett and Miriam spent long hours in the saddle, side by side but rarely speaking. They didn't need to. Their silence held more trust than most men's oaths. He built her a room, didn't tell her it was hers. Just cleared the old storage closet beside the kitchen, added a window, stripped the floor, and brought in a bed frame he'd carved himself years before, back when he still thought things like quiet and safety might be earned. She stood in the doorway when it was finished, hands in her pockets. It's not a cell, he said. She stepped inside, touched the windowsill. The view looked out over the cottonwoods by the creek. I don't sleep behind doors, she said, but she stayed. That night the door stayed open, and she slept under a quilt she didn't have to steal. In August, Rhett went to town again, but this time she came with him. She wore one of his old shirts tied at the waist, jeans cut to fit, and a hat pulled low. No one looked twice. They kept close to the dry goods store, bought flour, coffee, sugar, nails. At the counter, she reached for her own coin, but he covered it with his hand. She didn't argue. Outside, she paused by the hitching post. There's a telegraph office, she said. You expecting word? No. Just wondered if anyone's still out there. You got kin. Not the kind who'd take me in. They left it at that. But that night, she sat at the creek until dark, skipping stones and staring out like the water might offer some answer the sky wouldn't give. The peace, such as it was, began to fray in September. It started with a rider. A stranger came down the trail from the north, slow, casual, not lost, not curious, just too sure of himself. Rhett watched from the porch. Miriam stood behind the curtain. The man was lean, dressed neat, carried a revolver low and loose. He nodded as he reined in. Afternoon. Rhett didn't return it. Name's Clay Nolan. I'm looking for someone. You seen a girl, young, small thing. Might be going by another name. What's she to you? He smiled like it was a joke. She's trouble, got a bounty on her head. No one like that here. Clay's eyes flicked toward the house. Mind if I water my horse? Rhett stepped down from the porch. You're watered, move on. For a second it seemed like Clay might press it, but he read the set of Rhett's shoulders and thought better of it. Well, if you do see her, there's good money in it. I've got money. The man tipped his hat and rode off. Rhett watched him disappear into the trees, then turned toward the house. Miriam stood in the doorway, face pale. That's one of Rourke's, she said. Used to keep order, used to break women's ribs. He won't come back soon, Rhett said. But he will. They doubled the watch after that, moved the horses closer. Miriam carried her rifle everywhere, and Rhett, who once thought the land could keep the world out, started sleeping with his boots on. A week later, they found the dog gutted behind the barn. No note, no prints, just the message writ plain in blood. They buried it without words, and Miriam stood at the grave longer than Rhett could bear to watch. That night she laid her rifle beside the bed, not under it. If they come, she said, I won't run again. He nodded, I know. She looked at him long and slow, and something broke in her face. Not fear, not grief, but the last sliver of hope that she'd ever be just a woman again. Not quarry, not myth, just flesh. I didn't mean to stay this long, she said. You think I mind. I think I've made your life smaller. You've made it real. The silence after that was thick, almost holy. And when she kissed him, slow, deliberate, it wasn't out of passion. It was a claim, a promise made not in words, but in blood and bone, the kind of promise that meant something would die before it was broken. Autumn slid in with its copper skies and brittle wind, crisping the leaves and tightening the air. The trees turned gold and rust across the lower hills, and smoke from the chimney began to curl steady again, coiling like a warning. Rhett sharpened the axes. Miriam cleaned the rifles every morning. They didn't speak of the man with the bounty again, but the stillness between them had changed. It was no longer safety. It was waiting. She started training the new colt. A nervous thing, all legs and bone and snort, spooked by shadows. Miriam took to it with a patience that masked calculation. The same way she handled a gun, the same way she studied every tree line before stepping into the open. You expecting a siege? Red asked once. She tightened the saddle girth. I've lived through worse. They set traps around the perimeter, wire bells strung through the brush, reinforced the barn door with an iron latch Rhett hadn't used in years. He carved runes into it without explaining why, and she didn't ask. Out here, superstition was just another form of survival. Then came the smoke. Late one evening, as dusk dragged long across the grassland, Miriam came running from the far ridge. Breathless, eyes sharp. Fire, she said. Rhett followed her out. They climbed to the ridge and saw it low and mean creeping through the dry brush near the northern fence line. Controlled, not wild, a signal. They rode out with buckets, blankets, and shovels, stamped it out before it could take root, but they found something else in the ashes, a boot print, small, fresh. He's marking territory, Rhett said. No, Miriam muttered. He's hunting. That night they didn't sleep, took shifts on the roof with rifles in hand. In the cold hours before dawn, Rhett watched her silhouette against the stars, hair tied back, eyes scanning the dark. You ever kill a man from that distance? He asked. She didn't turn. Farther. He didn't ask when or why. Weeks passed, drawn tight with dread. They never saw the rider again. But the signs were there, hoof marks circling wide, the fence wire clipped clean, a dead hawk nailed to the gatepost one morning. Miriam burned it without a word. Then came the rain. A late October storm lashed the house for 2 days straight. Trees bent, the creek swelled, and on the third morning, just after sunrise, they heard the shot, one clean from the west. Rhett and Miriam moved as one. Rifles, oilskins, horses. They rode to the edge of the west pasture and found the calf dead. Neck snapped, no bullet wound, a message. Drowin' us out, Rhett said. Miriam dismounted, scanned the brush. Her face was still, but her fingers twitched. He's close, she said. I can feel it. That night, Rhett cleared the table and rolled out an old map. The property lines, the ridges, the choke points, all laid out in yellowing ink. You think he's alone? She asked. He looked at her. Don't you? She shook her head. Rourke had men, not many, but loyal, the kind who'd burn a town to the ground for the right voice in their ear. Rhett leaned back. Then we give 'em no town to burn. They set the traps deeper, hid rifles in the brush, stocked the cellar. But it was Miriam who laid out the plan, not to run, not to hide, to end it. We can't keep watching the windows, she said. I lived that way too long. You don't sleep. You don't breathe. You rot from the inside. He watched her hands, how steady they were now. You want to hunt him. I want to stop being prey. He didn't argue. The next morning she saddled up before dawn, packed light, took the high rifle and a coil of rope. Rhett met her at the barn, handed her a compass and said, "Bring his body back." She looked at him, eyes flat with resolve. You want proof. I want it to be over. She rode west alone, didn't look back. And Rhett, who'd spent his whole life believing silence was safety, stood by the gate and listened to the wind, hoping he hadn't just sent the only person who ever understood him into a killing she might not return from. 3 days passed. Rhett did the work alone. He mended a busted axle, cleared the chimney, checked the cattle twice daily, but everything he touched felt brittle, like the land was holding its breath. Each night he left the lantern lit in the window and slept by the front door with his rifle across his lap. The dog's grave by the barn had fresh stones laid over it. Miriam had done that before she left, and now Rhett found himself pausing by it, as if waiting for some kind of sign. There wasn't one. On the 4th day, just before dusk, a horse limped in from the west. It was the gelding she'd taken, riderless. Sweat-caked and nicked with burrs, its left flank was smeared with blood, not its own. Rhett pulled the saddle, checked the bags. No note, no keepsake. Only the rifle empty chamber, and a coil of rope stained dark and stiff. He didn't saddle a fresh mount right away. He stood there, one hand resting on the saddle horn, listening to the wind shift. Then he went inside and opened the chest beneath his bed. Inside was the revolver he hadn't touched in years, the one with notches on the grip, the one he'd sworn never to use again. He cleaned it slow, then packed the saddlebag with jerky, water, and salt, left at first light. Miriam had taught him how to track better than he ever cared to learn. He found signs of her passing clear as script, broken twigs, crushed grass, the heel mark where she dismounted. But what chilled him was how clean the trail stopped near the base of Raven Hill. There he found a circle of churned earth, horse prints in wild scatter, and a dark spatter trailing up toward the rocks. He followed it. It took hours to climb the narrow pass. Wind howled through the granite teeth, and the sun threw long blades across the canyon below. At the top he saw them, 3 men. One was dead, throat opened like a second mouth. The second lay face down, hands burned at the wrists, as if he'd grabbed the wrong end of a branding iron. The third was on his knees, coughing blood. Miriam stood behind him, rope slack in one hand, knife in the other. She didn't flinch when Rhett appeared, just looked over her shoulder, eyes empty of shock. I thought you'd stay put. You didn't come back. I wasn't done. Rhett walked forward, boots crunching over bone and gravel. He nodded to the dying man. Who is he? Last of 'em, she said. Rourke's old second, said Clay's dead, tried to turn on him. Rhett looked down. The man was trying to speak. He knelt beside him. You hunting her? Rhett asked. The man wheezed. Not anymore. Rhett rose. You want him gone. Miriam looked at the canyon edge. He's already there. Rhett dragged the body to the rim and kicked it off. No words, no ritual, just gravity. They rode back in silence, stopping once to water the horses. She didn't speak. Her hands never shook. Blood crusted at her sleeve, not hers. At the ranch, he brought her water, left it on the table. She sat on the floor beside the hearth, knees drawn up, staring into the unlit firebox. I wanted to be merciful, she said finally. You were, he said, to yourself. She shook her head. There's no mercy in it. He knelt beside her, not touching her, just close, like she needed a witness more than comfort. I kept a part of myself hidden, even from you. You showed me what mattered. No, she said, not yet. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. It was stiff, edges dark with old blood. She handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He unfolded it. It was a photograph, faded, creased, a little girl, maybe 7, smiling crookedly beside a barn that looked like it had already been claimed by weather. "My sister," Miriam said. "She died in that place. I stayed because I thought maybe it would protect her." She looked at him then, something shattered in her face. "I killed them all for her, not just Rourke, not just his men. There were others. You didn't take in a victim. You took in a weapon." Rhett sat back, hands still holding the photo. "Good," he said. She blinked. "Because I'm tired of pretending the world's fair. I'd rather ride beside someone who knows it ain't." She let out a sound, not a sob, not a laugh. Something between. The fire stayed unlit, but they sat there, dusk thickening around them. Two people shaped by blood and silence, neither one clean, neither one broken, not anymore. Winter came back with teeth. By November, the first storm rolled over the hills like a curse, driving snow in sideways sheets, turning the land white and unfamiliar. Rhett patched the roof. Miriam laid fresh salt along the threshold. They didn't speak much. What needed saying had already been carved into the dirt and written in the blood of men who thought her life could be traded like cattle. The ranch didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like ground held and claimed. She moved through it now like a woman who knew every nail, every weak floorboard. The cellar held more than canned peaches. It held rifles wrapped in oilcloth, ammunition boxes, a ledger where she'd begun to write names. Not all crossed out. He asked her once what she'd do with that list. "When I finish it," she said, "I'll burn it, then maybe I'll sleep." Rhett nodded, left it alone. They spoke rarely of the men they'd buried, of the horse left lame, of the wound that reopened along her ribs every time the weather turned. But he saw the way she tensed at the thunder of hooves too near the house. How her eyes still tracked the tree line every morning. One night, deep in December, they sat by the fire with the dog's old collar on the mantel. No words. Just the creak of wood settling and wind at the panes. She broke the silence. "You ever think about leaving?" "No. Not even before me. I came here to be forgotten. And now." He turned to look at her. She was barefoot, coat draped over her shoulders like armor shrugged loose. "Now," he said, "I hope they remember me the way I remember you." She tilted her head, watching him. "As what?" "As the storm they should have run from." She reached for his hand, fingers still calloused from rope and rifle work, and placed it over her heart. Her pulse was slow, steady. "I want to marry you," she said. He didn't speak. Just watched her. There was no softness in her voice, no plea, only truth. "I'm not asking for safety," she said, "or peace, or anything that don't come with scars. I know. I'm asking for a place beside you. In blood, in work, in whatever comes." He took a long breath. The wind howled louder then, as if waiting for his answer. "All right," he said, "you'll have it." She didn't smile, just leaned forward and kissed him once, slow and dry as the plains. It tasted of ash and survival, and something holy too. They married in the spring. No preacher, no papers, just the land and a fire and a ring she'd forged from her father's melted spurs. She wore his coat, he wore his oldest boots. Afterward they didn't change, not much. Miriam still rose before dawn, saddle creased and half silent. Rhett still watched the sky like it owed him something, but they rode side by side now. When storms came, they faced them together. The land had a way of forgetting names, of burying truths so deep they became myth, but some stories didn't vanish. Years later, when riders passed through and asked about the woman who once walked out of a snowstorm and never left, the locals told it different ways. Some said she was a ghost, some said she was a witch. Others swore she was a hired gun who found God in the arms of a rancher too quiet to scare. But those who knew, the ones who'd seen the way she carried herself, the way she looked at a man with a rifle like it was just another kind of tool, they said she was something else entirely. Not a wife, not a widow, a reckoning. And the ranch, high in the hills where the wind cut clean, was where she'd finally decided to stay, not because she was safe, but because she'd made it hers.